My name is Catherine, and when my daughter Roselyn banned me from her dream wedding, she had no idea I was the one secretly paying for the entire thing. The $85,000 venue, the designer flowers, the 5-course dinner for 200 guests, all of it funded by the mother she decided wasn't good enough to witness her special day. But what Roselyn didn't know was that I'd kept every receipt, every contract, and every cancellation clause, and I was about to teach her the most expensive lesson of her life. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. You know that feeling when someone you've sacrificed everything for treats you like you're invisible? When the person you brought into this world, raised, and supported through every dream suddenly decides you're not worthy of their biggest moment? That was my reality, 3 weeks before what was supposed to be the wedding of the century in Millbrook Heights. Let me paint you the picture of how this all started. Roselyn had always been my princess, not in a spoiled way, but in that magical way where you see your child's eyes light up and you'd move mountains to keep that sparkle alive. When she was 7, she used to plan elaborate tea party weddings for her dolls in our backyard garden in Ashwood Creek. She'd spend hours arranging tiny flowers and making sure every detail was perfect. "Mama," she'd say, "when I get married for real, it's going to be the most beautiful day ever, and you'll be right there next to me." Fast forward 23 years, Roselyn had grown into this stunning, successful marketing executive living in the upscale Riverside district. She'd found her Prince Charming, a guy named Trevor, who worked in finance, and treated her well, I'll give him that. When they got engaged 8 months ago, I was over the moon. Finally, my little girl was going to have her fairy tale moment. But here's where the story gets interesting. Roselyn and Trevor wanted their dream wedding at the prestigious Grandview Manor, this breathtaking estate overlooking Crystal Lake. The kind of place where celebrities get married, where every photo looks like it belongs in a magazine. The problem? The venue cost more than most people's houses. $45,000 just for the space, plus another $40,000 for the preferred catering package. Trevor's parents, the Ashfords, were well off, but not throw around $85,000 on one day wealthy. Roselyn was doing well for herself, but she was also saving for a house down payment. I watched my daughter's face fall when she realized her dream venue was out of reach. That's when I made a decision that seemed so simple, so loving at the time. I called Grandview Manor myself. "This is Catherine Hartwell," I told the event coordinator, Priscilla Vanderberg. "I'd like to book your estate for my daughter's wedding on October 14th, full package, no expense spared." I put it all on my credit card. The venue, the flowers, the premium catering upgrade, even the string quartet she'd mentioned wanting. Everything. But I made one crucial request. Please don't mention that I'm paying for this. I want my daughter to think it's coming from the groom's family. It's important to me that she doesn't feel any pressure or obligation. Miss Vanderberg assured me that discretion was part of their premium service. For 6 months, I watched my daughter plan her perfect wedding. She'd call me every few days, bubbling with excitement about the menu tasting, the floral arrangements, the way the sunset would hit the lake during their ceremony. I'd listen to every detail, offering suggestions, sharing in her joy, never once hinting that I was the one making it all possible. I thought I was being the perfect mother, the kind who gives without expecting credit, who loves without conditions. I was so proud of myself for being able to give her this gift, this perfect start to her new life. Then, 3 weeks ago, everything changed. It started with a phone call on a Tuesday evening. I was making dinner, humming along to an old song on the radio, when Roselyn's name popped up on my phone screen. But instead of her usual cheerful voice, she sounded cold, almost businesslike. "Mom, we need to talk about the wedding." "Of course, sweetheart. What's on your mind? Did you decide on the appetizer selection? I still think those salmon canapes would be—" "You're not coming." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually had to sit down at my kitchen table. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "You're not invited to the wedding anymore. The Ashfords think it would be better if you weren't there. More peaceful. They're concerned about you causing drama." "Drama? Me? The woman who had never raised her voice at a single wedding planning meeting, who had bent over backwards to accommodate every request, every change of heart? Roselyn, honey, what drama? I've done nothing but support this wedding. I've been nothing but excited for you and Trevor. Her voice got even colder. Mom, we both know you have a tendency to make things about yourself. The Ashfords have been so generous with this wedding, and we can't risk anything going wrong. It's just one day. You'll understand when you're older. When I'm older? I'm 52, not 92. And what did she mean by the Ashfords being generous? Every time she had mentioned Trevor and his parents coming through with something, I had been the one calling Miss Vanderburg to make it happen. That's when it hit me like a tsunami. My daughter thought Trevor's parents were paying for her dream wedding. She had no idea that her own mother, the woman she was now uninviting, had spent her entire retirement savings to give her this day. But the conversation wasn't over. The final blow was yet to come. Besides, Roselyn continued, her voice taking on that dismissive tone I'd heard her use with difficult clients. Grandview Manor has very strict guest limits. Every spot matters. Trevor's extended family is quite large, and we simply can't accommodate everyone we might want there. I sat there in my kitchen, surrounded by wedding planning magazines I'd bought to help her, listening to my only child explain why I wasn't worthy of a seat at the wedding I was secretly funding. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every conversation, every moment of the past 6 months. Had I somehow given her the impression I was difficult? Had I overstepped boundaries I didn't know existed? By morning, I'd made a decision. If Roselyn wanted to believe that the Ashfords were her generous benefactors, if she wanted to exclude the mother who'd given her everything for a family who'd given her nothing, then maybe it was time she learned what generosity actually looked like. I walked to my home office, opened my filing cabinet, and pulled out a thick folder labeled Roselyn's Wedding, Grandview Manor. Inside were copies of every receipt, every contract, every payment confirmation. At the bottom of the stack was the contract I'd signed with Miss Vanderburg, including a clause I'd barely glanced at when I signed it. Cancellation policy. Full refund available up to 14 days prior to event date. I had 11 days. And that's when I realized my daughter was about to learn the most expensive lesson of her entitled little life. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning after that devastating phone call, I woke up in my quiet house in Ashwood Creek, and for a split second, everything felt normal. The October sunlight was streaming through my kitchen windows, highlighting the wedding planning materials I'd left scattered across my breakfast table the night before. Sample menus, fabric swatches, timeline spreadsheets, all evidence of 6 months of careful preparation for a day I was no longer invited to witness. I made my coffee in the same ceramic mug Roselyn had given me for Mother's Day 3 years ago. World's Best Mom, painted in cheerful yellow letters, now feeling like a cruel joke. As I sat at my kitchen island, I could see my reflection in the window, a 52-year-old woman who'd spent the last 6 months believing she was doing something beautiful for her daughter. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was in the modest 3-bedroom colonial I bought after my divorce 10 years ago, surrounded by evidence of a wedding that cost more than I made in a year. I'd been so careful with every detail, so proud of my ability to give Roselyn something I never had, a mother who could afford to make dreams come true without asking for anything in return. My phone buzzed with a text from my sister Janet, who lived 2 hours away in Riverside Hills. How are the final wedding preparations going? So excited to see Roselyn walk down the aisle. I stared at the message for a long time. Janet didn't know yet. No one knew yet. As far as our entire extended family was concerned, they were all planning to attend Roselyn's wedding at the prestigious Grandview Manor in 11 days. They had already booked hotel rooms, bought new outfits, arranged time off work. My brother Thomas was driving up from Georgia with his whole family. I scrolled through my photos, stopping at a picture from last month's bridal shower I'd hosted in my backyard. Roselyn looked radiant in her white sundress, surrounded by aunts and cousins and family friends, all of us laughing as she opened gift after gift. I remember how she'd hugged me that day, whispering, "Thank you for making this so special, Mom. You always know exactly what I need."
But apparently, what she needed now was for me to disappear. I pulled up my banking app and looked at my credit card statement. There it was, line after line of charges to Grandview Manor, Celestial Florals, Premier Catering Services, all time-stamped over the past 6 months. The numbers were staggering when you saw them all together like that. I'd been paying incrementally, spreading the costs across several cards, telling myself it was an investment in my daughter's happiness. The house felt different now, heavier somehow. I walked through the living room where Roselyn used to curl up on the couch during college breaks, complaining about professors and boyfriends while I made her favorite snacks. The walls were still covered with photos of her high school graduation, college graduation, her promotion celebration last year. In every single picture, she was smiling, that bright, confident smile that had been my greatest achievement as a mother. Or so I thought.
I found myself standing in her old bedroom, which I'd kept exactly the same since she moved out 4 years ago. The pale pink walls she'd chosen when she turned 16, the bookshelf full of romance novels and business textbooks, the desk where she'd written her college application essays. On her dresser sat a framed photo of the two of us from her 25th birthday dinner last year, both of us dressed up and laughing over champagne at that expensive restaurant in the city. Looking at that photo now, I wondered when exactly I'd become the kind of mother who needed to be excluded from important family moments. When had I transformed from the person she confided in to the person she found embarrassing? My neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on the front door around noon, holding a casserole dish and wearing her usual concerned expression. "Catherine, dear, I couldn't help but notice you didn't bring in your mail yesterday. Everything all right?" I'd barely slept, barely eaten, and apparently it showed. Mrs. Patterson had been my neighbor for 8 years, ever since I'd moved to this quiet street after the divorce. She'd watched Roselyn grow from a college student into a successful young woman, had been there for every milestone celebration in my backyard. "Oh, just wedding jitters," I managed to say, accepting the casserole with shaking hands. "You know how it is." "Of course! 11 more days until the big day. You must be beside yourself with excitement. Grandview Manor. My goodness, Catherine, that must have cost the groom's family a fortune. They certainly don't mind opening their wallets for your Roselyn." The groom's family. If only she knew. After Mrs. Patterson left, I sat in my living room with her casserole cooling on the coffee table, untouched. The silence in the house was deafening. This should have been one of the happiest weeks of my life. I should have been finalizing last-minute details, getting my nails done, deciding which jewelry to wear. Instead, I was sitting alone, trying to process the fact that my own daughter had deemed me unworthy of witnessing the day I'd spent my savings life to create. My phone rang around 2 p.m. Roselyn's name on the caller ID made my heart race. Maybe she'd changed her mind. Maybe she'd realized how cruel she'd been. Maybe this was all just pre-wedding stress talking. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Mom, I need you to do me a favor. Trevor's mom wants to know if you have any of those wedding planning magazines you were always buying. She wants to put together a little keepsake album for us, and she needs some inspiration for the layout." My wedding planning magazines, the ones I bought with my own money to help plan the wedding I was now banned from attending, the ones I'd annotated with ideas for her special day. "Of course," I heard myself saying. "I'll drop them by your apartment this evening. Actually, could you just leave them with the concierge? We're having dinner with the Ashfords tonight to go over final details, and I don't want to keep them waiting." Final details for the wedding I was paying for with the people who were taking credit for my generosity. That evening, I loaded a box with every wedding magazine I'd collected over the past 6 months. As I drove through the upscale Riverside district toward Roselyn's apartment building, I caught a glimpse of her through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the lobby restaurant. She was at a table with Trevor and his parents, all of them laughing over wine and what looked like wedding planning documents spread across the table. She looked so happy, so relaxed, so completely unburdened by any concern for the mother she had just excluded from the most important day of her life. Driving home through the quiet streets of my neighborhood, I made a decision. Tomorrow, I was going to make some phone calls. Not to beg, not to plead, not to try to change Roselyn's mind about inviting me. Tomorrow, I was going to start making some very different kinds of calls. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that should have filled me with excitement about the approaching wedding. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at my credit card statements and trying to work up the courage to make the calls I'd promised myself I would make. But before I could dial a single number, my phone rang. It was my sister Janet, and her voice was tight with confusion and hurt. "Catherine, dear, I just got off the phone with Roselyn. She says I'm not invited to the wedding anymore either. What on earth is going on?" My blood went cold. "What do you mean you're not invited? You're her aunt. You've been planning this trip for months."
That's what I said. But she told me that Trevor's family is larger than they initially realized, and they've had to make some difficult cuts to the guest list. She said she hopes I'll understand that they need to prioritize Trevor's relatives since his family is hosting the event. His family is hosting the event. The lie was spreading like a virus through my family, and I was the only one who knew the truth. "Did she say anything else?" I managed to ask. "Well, yes. She said you wouldn't be there either because you and she had some kind of disagreement about the wedding planning." "Catherine, what disagreement? You've been nothing but supportive of this wedding. You've spent months helping her with every detail." I closed my eyes, feeling the walls of Roselyn's deception closing in around me. Not only had she banned me from the wedding I was secretly funding, but now she was systematically removing my entire side of the family while spinning lies about why we weren't welcome. "Janet, I need to call you back. There's something I need to handle first." After hanging up, I sat in stunned silence for about 10 minutes. Then my phone rang again. This time, it was my brother Thomas calling from Georgia. "Kat, what the hell is going on with Roselyn's wedding? I just got a call saying we're not invited anymore. Something about venue capacity and family priorities. My kids have been talking about nothing but this wedding for weeks. They bought new clothes. Melissa took time off work. What am I supposed to tell them?" The same lies, the same excuses, the same casual dismissal of people who'd been part of Roselyn's life since the day she was born. "Thomas, I'm gonna figure this out and call you back, okay?" "This isn't like Roselyn, Kat. Something's not right here. Did you two have some kind of falling out?" After I hung up with Thomas, I sat staring at my phone as the full scope of what was happening began to sink in. This wasn't just about me being excluded from the wedding. Roselyn was systematically removing my entire family while giving all the credit for the wedding to Trevor's family. She was rewriting the story of her own wedding to erase any trace of her mother's contribution or her mother's side of the family. Then came the call that broke me completely. My phone rang at 11:30 a.m. and the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, a cheerful voice said, "Hello, this is Amanda Ashford, Trevor's mother. I hope you don't mind me calling directly." My heart started racing. Trevor's mother, the woman my daughter believed was paying for her wedding, was calling me. "Oh, hello, Mrs. Ashford. What can I do for you?" Well, I wanted to personally thank you for being so understanding about the wedding situation. Roselyn explained that you've graciously stepped back to allow our family to host the celebration for the children. I know it must have been difficult to give up your mother of the bride role, but I want you to know how much we appreciate your sacrifice. My sacrifice. She thought I was sacrificing my role in the wedding, not my life savings for the wedding. "I also wanted to let you know," Amanda continued, her voice warm with what seemed like genuine gratitude, "that we've added some special touches that I think Roselyn would have wanted you to know about. We've upgraded the floral arrangements to include white orchids. I remember Roselyn mentioning they were your favorite flowers. And we've arranged for a small memorial candle for your late mother. Roselyn spoke so lovingly about her grandmother." White orchids. My mother's memorial candle. These were details I had discussed with Roselyn months ago, details that were now being presented as thoughtful additions from Trevor's family. They were taking credit not just for funding the wedding, but for the personal, meaningful touches that came from my own family history. That's very thoughtful, I managed to whisper. I also wanted to assure you that even though you won't be physically present at the ceremony, you'll be in our hearts. Roselyn showed us some of the beautiful photos of you two together over the years. You've raised such a wonderful daughter, Catherine. Trevor's father and I feel so blessed that she's joining our family. The irony was suffocating. Here was this lovely woman thanking me for my understanding while taking credit for everything I had sacrificed to give my daughter. She genuinely believed she was being gracious and considerate, when in reality she was twisting the knife that my own daughter had plunged into my heart. Mrs. Ashford, can I ask you something? What exactly did Roselyn tell you about why I won't be at the wedding? There was a brief pause. Well, she explained that you felt it would be best if our family took the lead on this celebration, given that we're hosting it. She said you wanted her to feel fully embraced by our family and thought your presence might make things feel divided. She spoke so highly of your selflessness, Catherine. Not every mother would be willing to step aside for the greater good. Selflessness. She thought I had voluntarily removed myself from my daughter's wedding out of some noble desire to let Trevor's family shine. Meanwhile, Roselyn had told me I was being excluded because I was dramatic and problematic.
And she mentioned, Amanda continued, that you've been having some health issues lately and weren't sure you'd be up for such a large celebration. We completely understand, of course. These big events can be overwhelming. Health issues? Now I was apparently too sick to attend my own daughter's wedding. The lies were becoming more elaborate by the hour. After I hung up with Amanda Ashford, I sat in my kitchen feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The woman was lovely, gracious, and completely deceived. She believed she was funding a wedding for a young woman whose selfless mother had stepped aside for the good of the family. She had no idea that the selfless mother was actually the one paying for everything while being systematically erased from the event. But the worst part wasn't Amanda's misunderstanding. The worst part was realizing that my daughter had crafted these lies so carefully, so convincingly, that she had turned my exclusion from the wedding into evidence of my maternal virtue. She had found a way to make my absence look like a gift I was giving her, rather than a cruel punishment she was inflicting on me. I walked to my home office and pulled out the thick folder of wedding contracts and receipts. Every page told the story of a mother's love, of months of careful planning and financial sacrifice. But apparently, that story was being rewritten by a daughter who had decided her mother's love wasn't worth acknowledging. My hands were shaking as I found the business card for Priscilla Vanderburg at Grandview Manor. I stared at her number for a long time, thinking about the conversation we'd had 6 months ago when I'd booked the venue. I'd been so happy that day, so proud of being able to give Roselyn her dream wedding. I'd made Miss Vanderburg promise to keep my payment confidential because I wanted my daughter to feel surprised and blessed, not burdened. Now I realized that my desire to surprise her had given her the perfect opportunity to erase me entirely. I picked up my phone and dialed Miss Vanderburg's number. When she answered, her voice was as professionally warm as I remembered. Grandview Manor, this is Priscilla Vanderburg speaking. Miss Vanderburg, this is Catherine Hartwell. I need to discuss the wedding booking for October 14th. Of course, Mrs. Hartwell. How exciting that we're now just 8 days away from Roselyn's big day. I trust everything is going smoothly with the final preparations. 8 days. I had 8 days to decide whether I was going to let my daughter get married at the venue I was secretly funding, surrounded by Trevor's family who thought they were the generous hosts, while my own family had been systematically excluded based on lies about my character and health. Miss Vanderburg, I need to review the cancellation policy for this event. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The cancellation policy? Mrs. Hartwell, is there a problem? Has something changed with the wedding plans? Let's just say I'm reconsidering my level of investment in this particular celebration. Another pause.
longer this time. Mrs. Hartwell, I should remind you that your contract allows for a full refund only if cancellation occurs at least 14 days prior to the event date. After that point, cancellations result in forfeiture of all deposits and payments. I looked at my calendar. Today was Wednesday, October 6th. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, October 14th. So, if I were to cancel today, I would receive a full refund of all payments made? That's correct. However, Mrs. Hartwell, I have to ask, are you certain about this? This is quite close to the deadline, and I can't imagine what could have happened to warrant such a drastic decision. Your daughter seemed so excited about every detail when we spoke last week. When they spoke last week, about the wedding I was paying for, about the details I had helped plan, about the day that my daughter and Trevor's family believed was being generously funded by the Ashfords. Miss Vanderberg, if I were to cancel today, how quickly would you notify the wedding party? Well, we would need to contact them immediately, of course. This would affect not just the venue, but all of our preferred vendors. Catering, florals, music, everything. The couples and their families would need to be informed right away to give them time to make alternate arrangements. Alternative arrangements. 8 days before the wedding, for a celebration that 200 people believed was happening at one of the most exclusive venues in the state. I thought about Roselyn, probably at work right now, completely confident that her perfect wedding was 8 days away. I thought about Trevor's parents, so grateful for my understanding and selflessness. I thought about the lies she told about my health, about family disagreements that didn't exist, about my supposed dramatic tendencies. Miss Hartwell, are you still there? Yes, I'm here. Miss Vanderberg, I need to review the cancellation policy for the event. I had 8 days left in the cancellation period, and suddenly I knew exactly what I was going to do.
After hanging up with Priscilla Vanderberg, I sat frozen in my home office chair for what felt like an eternity. The weight of what I was contemplating pressed down on me like a physical force. Cancel my daughter's dream wedding 8 days before the ceremony? The mother who had spent 6 months orchestrating every detail was now considering destroying it all with a single phone call? But as I sat there surrounded by wedding contracts and receipts, a different kind of clarity began to emerge. This wasn't just about hurt feelings or wounded pride. This was about discovering that the daughter I thought I knew, the one I'd raised to value honesty, loyalty, and family, had become someone capable of elaborate deception and casual cruelty. I needed to understand how deep this went. I opened my laptop and logged into my email account, then searched for every message I exchanged with Roselyn over the past 6 months about wedding planning. What I found made my stomach turn. Message after message where she thanked me for my input and suggestions while simultaneously painting a picture of Trevor's family as the generous benefactors making her dreams come true. In March, she'd written, "Mom, the Ashfords are being so amazing about the venue. They insist on covering everything at Grandview Manor. I feel so lucky to be marrying into such a giving family." In June, "Trevor's mom took me to look at flower arrangements today. She has such sophisticated taste, and she's determined to make sure everything is perfect. I don't know what I did to deserve such generous in-laws." In August, "The Ashfords upgraded our catering package again. They said nothing is too good for their new daughter. Sometimes I feel guilty about how much they're spending, but Trevor says his parents just want to celebrate properly." Each email was like a dagger to my heart. While I was secretly emptying my savings account to fund these generous gestures, my daughter was building a mythology around Trevor's family's largesse. She wasn't just taking credit away from me, she was actively creating evidence of their generosity that could be shown to friends, relatives, anyone who asked about the wedding. But then I noticed something strange. In several of the emails, Roselyn mentioned specific details that she couldn't possibly have known unless she'd seen my original planning notes. The white orchid arrangements I discussed with the florist,
the memorial candle placement I'd requested for my mother, even the specific wine selection for the reception, a vintner I'd chosen because my mother had served it at my own wedding 23 years ago. How did Roselyn know about these deeply personal details if she believed Trevor's family was handling everything? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my recent calls. There it was. A number I recognized as Celestial Florals, the vendor I'd contracted directly for the wedding arrangements. I'd spoken with their designer, Madeline Chen, just 2 weeks ago about the final orchid placement. On impulse, I called the number. Celestial Florals, this is Madeline speaking. Hi, Madeline. This is Catherine Hartwell. I wanted to follow up on the white orchid arrangements for the October 14th wedding at Grandview Manor. Oh, yes, Mrs. Hartwell. Everything is confirmed and ready for delivery. Your daughter stopped by yesterday, actually, with her future mother-in-law. They both seemed so pleased with how the arrangements turned out. My heart started pounding. Roselyn was there with Mrs. Ashford? Yes, such a lovely pair. Mrs. Ashford was asking so many questions about the billing and payment arrangements. She seemed surprised that everything had already been handled. Your daughter explained that you had taken care of the initial coordination as a gift to the family, but that they were covering all the actual financial responsibility. A gift to the family. More lies, more elaborate stories to explain away my involvement while maintaining the fiction of the Ashfords' generosity. I called Premier Catering Services next. Premier Catering, this is David speaking. Hi, David, this is Catherine Hartwell regarding the October 14th reception catering at Grandview Manor. Yes, Mrs. Hartwell. I was actually planning to call you today. We had an interesting conversation yesterday with the Ashford family. They seem to be under the impression that they were responsible for our payment, but our records show that you've already settled the full amount. What did you tell them? Well, we explained that all financial arrangements had been handled through you, but they seemed quite confused. The young lady, the bride, suggested that perhaps there had been some miscommunication about the billing structure. She asked us to send any future correspondence directly to the Ashfords instead of you. The scope of the deception was staggering. Roselyn was systematically redirecting all vendor communication to Trevor's family to maintain the illusion that they were the ones paying for everything. She had turned my desire for discretion into a tool for erasing my contribution entirely.
But the most chilling realization came when I called Harmony Strings, the quartet that would be providing ceremony music. Harmony Strings, Julia speaking. Hi, Julia. This is Catherine Hartwell. I'm calling about the string quartet performance on October 14th at Grandview Manor. Oh, Mrs. Hartwell. I'm so glad you called. We received the most beautiful note from your daughter yesterday. She wanted to make sure we knew how meaningful it was that you had personally selected us for her wedding day. She said the piece you chose for her processional was the same one played at your own wedding, and that having that connection to family history was more important to her than we could know. My breath caught in my throat. She said that? Yes, it was really quite touching. She also mentioned that while the Ashford family was handling all the logistics and payments, the musical selections were entirely your domain because you understood the emotional significance of each piece. She wanted us to know that this was your special contribution to their day. After I hung up, I sat staring at my reflection in the computer screen, trying to process what I'd just learned. In private conversations with vendors, Roselyn was acknowledging my involvement and even expressing gratitude for my contributions. She recognized the personal significance of my choices, understood the love behind every detail I'd planned. But to her fiancé's family, to our extended family, to anyone who might judge or question, I was either a problematic figure who needed to be excluded or a helpful coordinator who had graciously stepped aside. She was living in two completely different versions of reality, depending on her audience. My phone buzzed with a text message from a number I didn't recognize. Hi, Mrs. Hartwell. This is Bethany from Grandview Manor's coordination team. Ms. Vanderberg asked me to follow up with you about timing for the final venue walkthrough. The Ashford family is planning to visit tomorrow afternoon, and we wanted to confirm if you'd be joining them or if you preferred a separate appointment.
I stared at the message, realizing that even the venue staff was confused about who was actually in charge of this wedding. In their minds, I was the financial contact, but the Ashfords were the family hosts, creating a logistical nightmare that nobody seemed able to resolve. I typed back, "I'll be there tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please don't mention my attendance to the other parties." Within minutes, my phone rang. Priscilla Vanderberg's number appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Hartwell, I hope you don't mind my calling directly, but I'm somewhat confused about tomorrow's arrangements. Are you planning to attend the walkthrough as the financial contact, or should we be coordinating primarily with the Ashford family? We want to make sure we're providing appropriate customer service, but frankly, we're not entirely clear on the family dynamics here." The family dynamics. Even the wedding professionals couldn't navigate the web of lies and misdirection that Roselyn had created. "Miss Vanderberg, let me ask you something. In your experience, is it normal for the people paying for a wedding to be excluded from the actual ceremony?" There was a long pause. "Well, no, Mrs. Hartwell, that would be highly unusual. Typically, whoever is funding the celebration would be among the most honored guests. And is it normal for the people not paying for the wedding to redirect vendor communications and take over planning responsibilities?" Another pause, even longer this time. "No, that would also be irregular. Mrs. Hartwell, may I ask if there's been some kind of family dispute? Because what you're describing sounds like there might be some confusion about roles and responsibilities." Confusion. That was one word for it. "Miss Vanderberg, let me be very direct with you. I am the sole financial sponsor of this wedding. Every deposit, every payment, every upgrade has come from my personal accounts. However, my daughter has told both families that Trevor's parents are the generous hosts, and she has excluded me from the guest list entirely. I have approximately 6 days left to cancel this event and receive a full refund. What would you do in my position?" The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mrs. Hartwell," she finally said, her voice much softer than before, "I think you need to have a very serious conversation with your daughter before you make any irreversible decisions. This level of miscommunication is not something we encounter often, and the implications for all the families involved are quite serious." After I hung up, I walked to my kitchen window and stared out at the October afternoon. In 6 days, 200 people were expecting to attend my daughter's wedding at one of the most prestigious venues in the state. Trevor's family believed they were hosting a celebration of their generosity. My own family had been systematically excluded based on lies about my character. And in the middle of it all was my daughter, orchestrating a deception so complex and so cruel that even wedding professionals were baffled by the family dynamics. I had 6 days to decide, let the charade continue or pull the plug on the entire thing. But first, I needed to understand exactly how long this deception had been going on and how many people were involved in maintaining it. I opened my laptop and began making a list of everyone I needed to call. The truth was about to get a lot more complicated.
Thursday morning arrived with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in days. I had 5 days left in the cancellation window, and I was determined to understand the full scope of what my daughter had orchestrated before I made my final decision. My kitchen table had transformed into a makeshift investigation headquarters. Legal pads covered with notes, vendor contact information spread across the surface, and my laptop open to a spreadsheet where I was tracking every lie I'd uncovered. The first call I made was to my cousin Rebecca, who lived 3 hours away in Millfield and had been planning to attend the wedding with her teenage daughter Sophie. Rebecca had always been close to Roselyn, more like a big sister than a cousin, and I was curious whether she'd been excluded like the rest of my family. "Catherine, I was just thinking about calling you. I'm so excited about the wedding this weekend. Sophie has been talking about nothing else. She's never been to such a fancy venue before." My heart sank. "Rebecca, you're still planning to come to the wedding?" "Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Although, I have to say, I was surprised when Roselyn called last week and asked me not to mention to anyone that you wouldn't be there. She said you were dealing with some private health issues and didn't want people making a fuss about your absence." There it was again. the health excuse. But this time, it came with instructions for Rebecca to actively participate in covering up my exclusion. What exactly did she ask you to do? Well, she said that if anyone asked where you were during the ceremony, I should just say you were feeling under the weather but sent your love. She was very specific about it, actually. She said Trevor's family didn't know about your health problems, and she didn't want them to feel awkward or responsible for accommodating you. I gripped the phone tighter. Rebecca, I want you to listen to me very carefully. I don't have any health problems. Roselyn has banned me from attending her wedding, and she's asked you to lie to cover up that fact. The silence on the other end was deafening. Catherine, that can't be right. Why would Roselyn ban you from her own wedding? You're her mother. You've been planning this event for months. That's what I'm trying to figure out. After explaining the situation to Rebecca, who was horrified and confused, I moved on to the next name on my list. My old friend Patricia, who had known Roselyn since she was a child and had been invited to the wedding as a family friend. Patricia, it's Catherine. I need to ask you about something regarding Roselyn's wedding. Oh, Catherine, I'm so sorry to hear you won't be able to make it. Roselyn mentioned you've been having some health challenges. Are you feeling any better? Again, with the health story. I was beginning to realize that Roselyn had systematically contacted everyone who might ask about my absence and provided them with a consistent cover story. Patricia, did Roselyn ask you to tell people anything specific about why I'm not attending? Well, she did mention that you'd prefer people not make a big deal about your absence. She said you were embarrassed about missing her special day and didn't want it to become a topic of conversation at the reception. The manipulation was breathtaking in its thoroughness. Not only had Roselyn created a false narrative about my health, but she'd also preemptively managed how people would discuss my absence, ensuring that no one would question or investigate why the mother of the bride wasn't present at her own daughter's wedding. My next call was to Roselyn's college roommate, Emma, who was serving as one of the bridesmaids. Mrs. Hartwell, how are you holding up? This must be such an emotional week for you. Emma, can I ask you something? What has Roselyn told you about my role in the wedding planning? Oh, she's talked about how helpful you've been with suggestions and coordination. She said you have such a good eye for details. Although she did mention that Trevor's family insisted on handling all the major decisions and expenses since they're hosting the event. She seemed a little overwhelmed by their generosity, to be honest. Even her closest friends believed the Ashford family was funding the wedding. But then Emma added something that made my blood run cold. She also mentioned how grateful she was that you understood the importance of letting Trevor's family take the lead. She said not every mother would be selfless enough to step back and let their new in-laws shine. It really showed her how much you love her. My own daughter had turned my exclusion from her wedding into evidence of my maternal love. She had convinced her closest friends that I was voluntarily absent out of some noble desire to let Trevor's family receive all the recognition for their generosity. But the most revealing conversation came when I called my neighbor's daughter, Carla, who worked as a photographer and had mentioned months ago that she'd love to help with wedding photos if needed. I was curious whether Roselyn had reached out to her for any additional photography services. Mrs. Hartwell, I was actually meaning to call you. I saw Roselyn at the photography studio downtown last month, and she mentioned something interesting. What kind of something?
Well, she was there reviewing proofs from her engagement session, and she started talking about how she wished she could include more family photos in the wedding slideshow they're preparing. She said she had so many beautiful pictures of you two together over the years, but that it might be awkward since you wouldn't be there to see the slideshow during the reception. My chest tightened. Roselyn was planning a wedding slideshow that would feature photos of our relationship, but I wouldn't be present to see it because she had banned me from attending. But then she said something that struck me as odd. Carla continued, She mentioned that she'd been thinking about setting up a private viewing of the slideshow for you before the wedding, so you could see it even though you couldn't attend the reception due to your health issues. She seemed genuinely sad about you missing it. This was the most confusing piece of the puzzle yet. According to Carla, Roselyn seemed genuinely upset about my absence and was even considering ways to include me in the wedding festivities despite my supposed health problems. It didn't match the cold, dismissive daughter who had banned me from her wedding without explanation. I decided to take a more direct approach. I called Roselyn's office. Hartwell Marketing Solutions, this is Jennifer speaking. Hi, Jennifer. This is Catherine Hartwell, Roselyn's mother. Is she available? Oh, Mrs. Hartwell, how exciting that the wedding is just days away. Unfortunately, Roselyn is in meetings all afternoon preparing for her time off next week. Can I take a message? Actually, Jennifer, can I ask you something? Has Roselyn mentioned anything to you about wedding planning challenges or family issues? Family issues? No, not at all. She's been so happy about everything. Although she did mention last week that she was worried about you overdoing it with all the wedding stress. She said she'd insisted you take a step back from the planning to focus on your health, and that Trevor's family had graciously taken over all the major arrangements. There it was again, the story that I had been encouraged to step back for my own well-being rather than being excluded against my will. She also mentioned, Jennifer continued, how touched she was that you'd agreed to let Trevor's family host the celebration. She said it showed how much you loved her and wanted her to feel fully embraced by her new family. After hanging up, I sat staring at my growing list of contacts and discoveries. A pattern was emerging that was more complex than simple exclusion or even straightforward deception. Roselyn seemed to be telling different versions of the story to different people. But in every version, she portrayed herself as someone who cared about my feelings and was making difficult decisions for my own benefit. To vendors, I was a helpful coordinator whose contributions were valued but whose financial role needed to be redirected to Trevor's family. To family friends, I was a sick mother whose absence was regrettable but necessary for my health. To extended family members, I was someone dealing with private health issues who preferred discretion about my condition. To her work colleagues, I was a mother who had been encouraged to step back to avoid wedding stress. To her closest friends, I was a selfless mother who had voluntarily ceded my role to let Trevor's family shine. In every single version of the story, Roselyn emerged as someone who cared about my feelings and was making difficult decisions for my own benefit. The sophistication of the narrative management was stunning. She had created a web of interconnected lies so comprehensive that everyone in our social circle had been given a specific role to play in maintaining the fiction of my voluntary absence. But there was one call I hadn't made yet, and I was saving it for last because I suspected it would be the most revealing of all. I dialed Trevor's number. Catherine, how are you doing? Roselyn said you've been under the weather. Trevor, I'm calling because I need to understand something about the wedding arrangements. Of course, anything I can help with. Although I have to say, I'm not involved in most of the detailed planning. My parents and Roselyn have been handling everything. What exactly has Roselyn told you about my role in the wedding planning? Well, she explained that you'd done a lot of the initial coordination work as a gift to our families, but that my parents wanted to take over all the financial responsibilities and major decision-making. She said you were relieved to step back and let them handle everything. Relieved. According to Trevor, I was relieved to be excluded from planning my daughter's wedding. And what did she tell you about why I won't be attending the ceremony? There was a pause. She said you had been having some health issues and weren't sure you'd be up for such a big event. She was really torn up about it, actually. She kept saying she wished there was a way to make the day less overwhelming so you could be there. Trevor genuinely believed that my absence was due to health problems and that Roselyn was disappointed about it. In his mind, his fiancée was a caring daughter dealing with a sick mother, not a manipulative woman who had banned her mother from a wedding her mother was funding. Trevor, has anyone in your family questioned why the mother of the bride won't be at the wedding?
My mom did ask about it. She was concerned about you and offered to help arrange any accommodations you might need. But Roselyn said you'd specifically asked not to make it a big deal because you didn't want to overshadow their celebration with worry about your condition. After I hung up with Trevor, I realized I was dealing with something far more sophisticated than simple cruelty or greed. My daughter had created an alternate reality so convincing and so comprehensive that she had managed to exclude me from the wedding I was paying for, while simultaneously appearing to be a loving, concerned daughter to everyone involved. The question was, did she actually believe her own lies, or was this all a calculated performance? I had 4 days to find out. And more importantly, I had 4 days to decide whether this elaborate deception deserved to be exposed in the most dramatic way possible. Friday morning brought an unexpected visitor to my door. I was reviewing my investigation notes over coffee when the doorbell rang at 8:30 a.m. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, professionally dressed, holding a manila folder with the kind of confident posture that suggested she was used to delivering important information. "Mrs. Hartwell, my name is Linda Castellano. I'm a private investigator hired by the Ashford family. May I come in?" My blood went cold. A private investigator? Had Trevor's parents somehow discovered that I was the one actually paying for the wedding? "What is this regarding, Miss Castellano?" "I think it would be best if we spoke inside. It concerns your daughter's wedding and some financial discrepancies that have come to light." I led her to my living room, my mind racing. Financial discrepancies could mean anything. Had someone discovered my payments? Had the vendors contacted the Ashfords directly about billing confusion? Linda sat across from me and opened her folder with the kind of methodical precision that made it clear she'd done this many times before. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to ask you some direct questions, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Are you aware that your daughter has been soliciting monetary gifts from multiple sources for her wedding expenses?" "What do you mean, soliciting monetary gifts?" Linda pulled out a stack of documents. Over the past 4 months, Roselyn has approached various family friends, distant relatives, and business associates, claiming that her family, meaning you, was struggling financially and couldn't afford to give her the wedding she deserved. She's collected over $23,000 in what she's calling family support donations. I stared at the papers she was showing me. Copies of checks, Venmo transfers, and handwritten notes. Names I recognized from our Christmas card list. People who had known Roselyn since childhood. Colleagues from her marketing firm. She told these people that you were too proud to ask for help directly, but that she was desperate to have a proper wedding and didn't want to burden you with debt you couldn't afford. She specifically mentioned that you were struggling since your divorce and that your fixed income couldn't cover wedding expenses. Fixed income, struggling since my divorce. I had never told Roselyn I was having financial difficulties because I wasn't having financial difficulties. I had been careful with money since my divorce, but I was hardly destitute. How did you discover this? Mrs. Ashford became suspicious when several people approached her at a charity event last month to congratulate her family on their generosity in helping out the Hartwell family with wedding costs. When she expressed confusion, they explained that they'd contributed money to help cover expenses for a mother who couldn't afford her daughter's dream wedding. Linda pulled out another document. This is a copy of a letter your daughter sent to her godfather, your brother-in-law Marcus, 3 months ago. I read the letter with growing horror.
In Roselyn's careful handwriting, she had crafted a heartbreaking story about my supposed financial struggles, my embarrassment about not being able to provide for her wedding, and her desperation to find a way to give me the gift of seeing her married properly without bankrupting me. She raised over $23,000 this way, and according to our investigation, she deposited all of it into a separate account that she's been using for what she's calling wedding extras. Things like her honeymoon upgrade, designer shoes, a more expensive photographer for the engagement session. My daughter had been running a charity scam using my supposed poverty as a cover story to fund her personal luxury items while I was draining my actual savings to pay for the basic wedding expenses. But that's not the most concerning part, Linda continued. Mrs. Ashford asked me to investigate further because she was beginning to suspect that the entire financial structure of this wedding wasn't what it appeared to be. She pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. Mrs. Hartwell, are you the person actually paying for the venue, catering, and other major wedding expenses? There was no point in lying anymore. Yes. Linda nodded grimly. We confirmed that yesterday, which means your daughter has orchestrated an elaborate fraud involving multiple families and dozens of individuals. She's collected money from family friends by claiming you couldn't afford the wedding, while simultaneously allowing my clients to believe they're hosting an expensive celebration, all while you're actually funding the entire event.
The scope of what Linda was describing was breathtaking. Roselyn hadn't just excluded me from the wedding I was paying for. She had created an entire fictional universe where everyone involved believed a completely different version of reality. There's more, Linda said, opening a third folder. We've discovered that your daughter has been documenting this entire process. She handed me printouts of social media posts, emails, and text messages. Screenshots of Roselyn's conversations with friends about how brilliant her strategy was, how she'd managed to get everyone to contribute to her perfect wedding without anyone realizing they were being manipulated. One text message to Emma, her college roommate, made my stomach turn. It's amazing how easy it is to get people to give you money when you tell them a sad story. Everyone wants to be the hero who saves the struggling single mom's daughter's wedding. Another message to a friend I didn't recognize. The best part is that everyone thinks they're doing something different. My mom's side family thinks she's sick. Trevor's side family thinks they're being generous hosts. The family friends think they're helping with charity. And my actual mom is paying for everything while thinking it's a secret gift. It's like I'm the director of a play where none of the actors know they're performing. Linda watched my face as I read. Mrs. Hartwell, your daughter has turned her wedding into an elaborate con game where she's managed to extract maximum financial and emotional benefit from everyone involved while giving nothing back to anyone. I set the papers down with shaking hands. Does Trevor know? That's what Mrs. Ashford wanted to find out. According to our investigation, no. Trevor genuinely believes his parents are funding the wedding and that you're absent due to health issues. He has no idea that his fiancée has been running multiple deception schemes or that she's been laughing about it with her friends. Linda leaned forward. Mrs. Hartwell, Mrs. Ashford hired me because she was concerned that her son was marrying someone who might be capable of financial fraud and emotional manipulation on this scale. What we've discovered suggests that your daughter has sociopathic tendencies when it comes to manipulating people for personal gain. Sociopathic tendencies. The words hung in the air like a diagnosis I didn't want to hear but couldn't deny. She's documented her own behavior extensively, Linda continued. It appears she's actually proud of how successfully she's manipulated everyone. In one message, she refers to herself as a master strategist who's managed to get literally everyone to contribute to her wedding while making each person feel special about their unique role.
Linda showed me another screenshot, this one from a group chat with Roselyn's work friends. Update on wedding fund manipulation project. Mom's side thinks she's sick, $0 contribution, but they'll feel guilty forever. Trevor's side think they're heroes, $0 actual contribution, but maximum credit. Family friends think they're helping a struggling family, $23K collected, and actual mom is funding everything while thinking it's a secret gift. Total wedding value, $108K. My actual cost, $0. This is why I went into marketing. Wedding fund manipulation project. She had literally given her deception scheme a project name and was tracking it like a business venture. But the final document Linda showed me was the most devastating of all. It was a printed email from Roselyn to someone named Ashley, dated just 5 days ago. The wedding is almost here, and everything has gone exactly according to plan. The only loose end is making sure my mom doesn't show up and ruin the narrative. I've convinced everyone she's too sick to attend, but I'm worried she might try to come anyway since she's the one actually paying for everything. I might need to take more drastic steps to ensure she stays away. The last thing I need is for Trevor's family to start asking questions about why the sick, struggling mother is suddenly appearing healthy and well-dressed at an expensive wedding she supposedly can't afford. More drastic steps. My daughter was actively planning ways to ensure I couldn't attend the wedding, even if I tried to show up. Linda closed the folders and looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. Mrs. Hartwell, Mrs. Ashford asked me to present you with an option. They're planning to confront Roselyn about these discoveries tomorrow morning, the day before the wedding. They wanted to give you the opportunity to be present for that conversation and to decide for yourself what action you want to take regarding the financial fraud and emotional manipulation. I stared at her, processing the magnitude of what she'd revealed. My daughter hadn't just excluded me from her wedding, she had turned my love, my family relationships, and my financial sacrifice into raw material for an elaborate scam that she was actually documenting and celebrating with her friends. What kind of action are the Ashfords considering? They're debating whether to proceed with the wedding at all. Trevor has no idea about any of this, and they're not sure whether to tell him before or after the ceremony. But they're also concerned about the money that's been fraudulently collected from your family and friends. Linda stood to leave, then turned back. Mrs. Hartwell, I have to ask, given what you now know about your daughter's behavior, what are you planning to do? You still have until tomorrow morning to cancel the venue and recover your financial investment.
After she left, I sat alone in my living room, surrounded by the evidence of my daughter's elaborate betrayal. This wasn't just about being excluded from a wedding anymore. This was about discovering that the person I'd raised and loved was capable of sophisticated, calculated cruelty on a scale I'd never imagined possible. Roselyn hadn't just lied to exclude me from her wedding. She had turned my exclusion into a profit center, collecting money from people who believed they were helping a struggling mother while simultaneously allowing other people to take credit for generosity they'd never shown. And she had documented the entire process like a case study in successful manipulation. I had less than 24 hours to decide what to do with this information. But for the first time since this nightmare began, I wasn't the only one who knew the truth. Saturday morning at 9 a.m., exactly 24 hours before my daughter's wedding was scheduled to begin, I sat in the private dining room of the Grandview Manor, facing what felt like a tribunal. Around the mahogany table sat Amanda and Robert Ashford, their son Trevor looking pale and confused, Linda Castellano with her folders of evidence, and Priscilla Vanderberg, who had been called in to discuss the contractual implications of what we'd discovered. I had spent Friday night in a state I can only describe as strategic calm. The emotional devastation of Thursday had crystallized into something much more focused. I wasn't just a hurt mother anymore. I was a woman who had been systematically defrauded by her own child. And I had allies who were equally invested in seeing justice served. Amanda Ashford spoke first, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Catherine, I want to apologize to you on behalf of our family. We had no idea that we were unknowingly participating in such an elaborate deception. When I thanked you for your understanding and selflessness, I had no idea you were actually funding the entire wedding while being excluded from attending it." Robert leaned forward, his businessman's demeanor barely containing his fury. "What your daughter has done isn't just cruel, it's criminal fraud. She's collected money under false pretenses, she's forged emotional manipulation on an industrial scale, and she's involved multiple families in her schemes." Trevor looked like he'd aged 10 years overnight. His hands were shaking as he stared at the evidence Linda had presented to them an hour earlier. "Mrs. Hartwell, I had no idea. I swear to you, I genuinely believed my parents were paying for everything and that you were too sick to attend. I would never have gone along with excluding you if I'd known the truth." Linda opened her primary evidence folder and spread the contents across the table. "Before we proceed, I think everyone should understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. This isn't a case of wedding planning gone wrong or even simple family drama. This is systematic fraud with multiple victims and extensive documentation of premeditated deception." She pointed to a timeline she'd created. Roselyn began the charity collection scheme 4 months ago, telling family friends that Catherine was struggling financially. She initiated the health excuse narrative 6 weeks ago, giving different people different versions of Catherine's supposed illness. She started redirecting vendor communications to the Ashford family 3 weeks ago to maintain the illusion of their financial responsibility. And she documented this all in writing, treating it like a successful business project. Priscilla Vanderberg cleared her throat. "From a contractual standpoint, Mrs. Hartwell, you have approximately 8 hours left to cancel this event and receive a full refund. However, given the circumstances, Grandview Manor is prepared to make an exception to our policy if you need more time to decide." "What kind of exception?" "We're willing to hold the venue for you until Monday morning. If you decide to proceed with cancellation after that point, we'll still honor the full refund given the extraordinary nature of this situation. We've never dealt with anything quite like this before." Amanda Ashford spoke again. "Catherine, I want you to know that whatever you decide, our family will support. If you choose to cancel the wedding, we'll help you communicate the reasons to the guests. If you choose to proceed, we'll insist that you attend as the honored guest you should have been from the beginning." But Robert was less diplomatic. "Personally, I think this wedding should be canceled regardless of what you decide about the venue. Trevor, you need to seriously consider whether you want to marry someone capable of this level of manipulation and deception." Trevor's was barely a whisper. "I keep thinking I must have missed something, some sign that she was capable of this. But she seemed so caring, so concerned about everyone's feelings. Even yesterday morning, she was worried about Mrs. Hartwell's health and wishing there was a way to include her in the celebration." Linda pulled out another document. "Trevor, this is a text message your fiancée sent to her friend Ashley yesterday evening after you had that conversation with her about wishing Mrs. Hartwell could come to the wedding." Trevor read the message aloud, his voice breaking. "Trevor is being so sweet about my mom not being able to come to the wedding. He keeps saying he wishes there was something we could do to make her feel included. If only he knew that the last thing I want is for her to show up and ruin my perfect narrative. Having him feel sorry for her actually makes this whole thing even better."
The silence in the room was deafening. I had been quiet through most of this discussion, but now I knew it was time to speak. "I want to thank all of you for bringing this to light and for giving me the support I never expected to have. But I need to tell you what I've decided to do." Everyone leaned forward. "I'm not going to cancel the wedding." Amanda looked shocked. "Catherine, after everything she's done to you?" "I'm not canceling it because I have a better plan." "Linda, you said Roselyn has been documenting her deception and treating it like a successful project. Well, I think it's time for her to present her findings to a larger audience."
I pulled out my own folder, which I'd spent Friday night preparing. I've been making some calls of my own. Every person who contributed money to Roselyn's fake charity fund, every family member who was given lies about my health, every vendor who was confused about billing arrangements, every wedding guest who was told a different story about why I wouldn't be attending. Robert's eyes lit up with understanding. You're going to expose her publicly. Not exactly. I'm going to give her the opportunity to explain herself publicly. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., when 200 wedding guests are seated at Grandview Manor expecting to celebrate Trevor and Roselyn's marriage, I'm going to ask for a moment to address the crowd. Trevor looked terrified. Mrs. Hartwell, what are you planning to say? I'm going to tell them the truth. All of it. The real story of how this wedding was planned and funded, who was actually responsible for each element, and what stories different people were told to maintain various deceptions. I'm going to let Roselyn explain to everyone simultaneously why she thought it was appropriate to exclude her mother from the wedding her mother funded while collecting charity money based on lies about that mother's financial situation. Linda was taking notes furiously. Catherine, you realize this will destroy her reputation permanently. Everyone she works with, everyone in her social circle, everyone in both families will know what she's done. Good, because everyone she works with, everyone in her social circle, and everyone in both families has been systematically lied to and manipulated. They deserve to know the truth about who they've been supporting. Amanda was quiet for a long moment. Catherine, I admire your approach, but are you sure you want to do this at Trevor's wedding? He's as much a victim of her deception as anyone. I looked at Trevor, who was staring at the table with tears in his eyes. Trevor, I'm going to ask you a direct question, and I need an honest answer. Now that you know who your fiancé really is, do you still want to marry her? He was quiet for almost a full minute. Finally, he looked up. Mrs. Hartwell, I fell in love with someone I thought was caring, honest, and family-oriented. The person Linda's investigation has revealed is none of those things. I don't think I can marry someone who's capable of treating her own mother this way, and certainly not someone who's been manipulating my entire family while laughing about it with her friends. Robert nodded approvingly. Then we support Catherine's plan. If Roselyn wants to have this wedding, she can explain to 200 guests why she thought her behavior was appropriate. Priscilla spoke up. Mrs. Hartwell, from a logistical standpoint, how do you want to handle this? Do you want me to seat you in the family section where you belong? Actually, I'd like to be seated in the back. I want to watch everyone's faces when they realize what's been happening, and I want Roselyn to have to look for me when I stand up to speak. Linda closed her folders. I'll prepare a comprehensive summary of all the evidence for you to reference during your speech. Every lie she told, every person she manipulated, every dollar she collected fraudulently. Everything. Amanda reached across the table and took my hand. Catherine, I want to know that after tomorrow, you'll always have a place in our family, regardless of what happens between Trevor and Roselyn. What she did to you was unforgivable, and we're honored to stand with you. As we prepared to leave the meeting, Trevor asked one final question. Mrs. Hartwell, are you going to give Roselyn any warning about what's going to happen tomorrow? I smiled for the first time in a week. Trevor, your fiancé is a master strategist who's proud of her ability to manipulate people without them knowing it. Tomorrow, she's going to discover what it feels like to be on the receiving end of a strategy she never saw coming. But, unlike her approach, mine will be based entirely on the truth. No lies, no manipulation, no deception. Just facts, evidence, and the simple question of whether she'd like to explain to 200 people why she thought her behavior was acceptable. As I walked out of Grandview Manor, I felt something I hadn't experienced since this nightmare began: anticipation.
In less than 24 hours, my daughter was going to learn that actions have consequences and that mothers who are pushed too far can push back harder than anyone expects. The wedding was still on, but it was going to be very different from what Roselyn had planned.
Sunday arrived with the kind of perfect October weather that wedding planners dream about. Clear skies, gentle breeze, golden sunlight filtering through the trees at Grandview Manor. As I drove through the estate gates at 1:30 p.m., 30 minutes before the ceremony was scheduled to begin, I couldn't help but appreciate the irony. This was indeed going to be a perfect day for a wedding, just not the kind Roselyn had been planning. I had dressed carefully for the occasion, not in the navy blue mother of the bride dress that still hung in my closet with its tags attached, but in a striking burgundy suit that commanded attention without being inappropriate for the venue. I wanted to look like someone who belonged at an elegant wedding, not someone who was struggling financially or suffering from mysterious health problems. Linda Castellano met me in the parking area, carrying a leather portfolio that contained our carefully organized evidence. "Are you ready for this, Catherine?" "I've been ready since Thursday morning," I replied, surprised by how steady my own voice sounded. As we walked toward the ceremony site, I could see guests arriving in clusters. Many faces I recognized: family friends who had contributed money to Roselyn's fake charity fund, extended family members who had been told I was too sick to attend, work colleagues who believed the Ashfords were generous hosts. They were all dressed in their finest clothes, carrying wrapped gifts, completely unaware that they were about to witness something very different from a traditional wedding celebration. I spotted my sister Janet near the guest registry table, looking confused and slightly hurt. She caught my eye and hurried over. "Catherine, what are you doing here? Roselyn said you were too sick to attend. Are you feeling better? Should you be out of bed?" "Janet, I'm feeling better than I have in years. Please take a seat wherever you'd like. There are some things that are going to be clarified very shortly." Near the entrance to the ceremony space, I saw Trevor's extended family mingling with guests they'd never met before. The Ashford relatives looked elegant and confident, clearly believing they were hosting a celebration that reflected well on their family's generosity. They had no idea they were about to discover they'd been unwitting participants in an elaborate fraud. Amanda Ashford approached me, her face tight with nervous energy. "Catherine, Trevor is in the groom's preparation room. He's struggling with this whole situation. Are you certain you want to proceed with the plan? Has he made a decision about the marriage itself? He's told us he can't go through with marrying her, but he doesn't know how to handle it in front of 200 people. He's terrified of humiliating his friends and family." I nodded. "Tell Trevor that he won't have to make any public announcements. I'll handle that part." As 2 p.m. approached, guests began filing into the ceremony space, a beautifully decorated outdoor area overlooking Crystal Lake. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an archway covered in the white orchids that I had personally selected, everything exactly as I had planned it 6 months ago when I thought I was creating a perfect day for my beloved daughter. I took my seat in the back row, just as I had requested. From this vantage point, I could see everything. The guests chatting quietly amongst themselves, the string quartet tuning their instruments, the photographer positioning himself to capture what he believed would be romantic moments. At exactly 2 p.m., the processional music began. The bridal party appeared at the back of the aisle, bridesmaids in the soft pink dresses Roselyn and I had chosen together, groomsmen in the charcoal gray suits that I had helped coordinate. They walked down the aisle with practiced smiles, taking their positions at the altar. Then came the moment I had both dreaded and anticipated. The bridal march began, and Roselyn appeared at the back of the aisle on the arm of my brother Thomas, who had agreed to walk her down the aisle since her father wasn't in the picture. She looked absolutely stunning. The dress we had selected together fit her perfectly. The veil cascaded elegantly down her back, and her makeup was flawless. For a moment, seeing her walking down the aisle I had paid for, wearing the dress we had chosen together, I felt a pang of the love and pride I had once felt for her. But then I remembered the text messages Linda had shown me, the documented manipulation, the elaborate lies told about my character and health. The pang of love hardened back into resolve. Roselyn took her place next to Trevor at the altar. Even from the back row, I could see that something was wrong with the groom. His face was pale,
His hands were shaking, and he kept glancing toward his parents in the front row as if looking for guidance. The officiant, a minister I didn't recognize, began the ceremony with the traditional opening words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Trevor and Roselyn in holy matrimony." I let him continue for about 3 minutes, long enough for everyone to settle in and focus their attention at the altar. Then, I stood up. The movement caught the attention of several guests in nearby rows. I heard whispers beginning to ripple through the crowd as people recognized me and began wondering why the supposedly sick mother of the bride was not only present, but standing during the ceremony.
"Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the outdoor space. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but before this ceremony proceeds, there are some things that need to be clarified for everyone present." The officiant stopped mid-sentence. Roselyn's head snapped around toward the back of the venue, her eyes wide with shock when she spotted me. Trevor actually looked relieved. "For those of you who don't know me, I'm Catherine Hartwell, Roselyn's mother. I know many of you were told that I was too ill to attend my daughter's wedding today, but as you can see, I'm in perfect health." The whispers grew louder. I could see guests turning to each other with confused expressions. "I'm standing up today because I believe that before Trevor and Roselyn exchange vows, everyone here should understand the true story of how this wedding came to be, who actually planned and funded it, and what different people have been told about the circumstances." Roselyn had gone completely white. "Mom, what are you doing? This isn't the time or place." "Actually, sweetheart, this is exactly the time and place. Because you've involved every person in this audience in your deception, and they deserve to know the truth." I began walking slowly down the aisle, Linda following behind me with the evidence portfolio. The photographer, confused but professional, kept taking pictures. "Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start by thanking those of you who contributed money over the past 4 months to help what you were told was a struggling single mother afford her daughter's wedding today. Your generosity was remarkable, and I'm sure you felt good about helping someone in need." I could see people beginning to shift uncomfortably in their seats. Several of the charity contributors were looking around at each other with dawning realization. I also want to acknowledge the Ashford family, who have been gracious and welcoming to what they believed was their generous hosting of this celebration. They've been nothing but kind to everyone involved. Amanda Ashford was watching me with a mixture of support and apprehension. "However, I think you all deserve to know some facts. First, I am not struggling financially and never have been. Second, I am not suffering from any health problems. Third, I am the person who has paid for every aspect of this wedding: the venue, the catering, the flowers, the music, everything you see here today." The whispers turned into audible gasps. I could see people pulling out their phones, probably to fact-check what I was saying with their own memories of recent conversations. Fourth, I was not invited to attend this wedding. My daughter banned me from the celebration I was secretly funding while telling different people different stories about why I wouldn't be here. Roselyn tried to interrupt. "Mom, you're being dramatic. We talked about this." "Did we talk about it, Rosalind? Because I have here documentation of what you've actually been saying to people." Linda opened the portfolio and handed me the first set of documents. "To your college friends, you said I was being selfless by stepping aside to let Trevor's family shine. To our extended family, you said I was sick with mysterious health problems. To your work colleagues, you said I had voluntarily reduced my involvement to avoid wedding stress. To the family friends who gave you money, you said I was struggling financially and too proud to ask for help." I could see Trevor's face crumpling with embarrassment and pain. Several guests were starting to stand up as if preparing to leave. "But perhaps most telling are the messages you sent to your friends documenting what you called your wedding fund manipulation project." The silence was now complete. Even the birds seemed to have stopped singing. "Rosalind,
Would you like to explain to these 200 people, people who love you, support you, and came here to celebrate your happiness, why you thought it was appropriate to systematically lie to and manipulate all of them? Would you like to explain why you collected $23,000 in charity money while excluding your mother from the wedding she was funding? Would you like to explain why you documented your deception and referred to your guests and family members as successful manipulation targets? Roselyn was shaking now, her carefully applied makeup starting to streak with tears. I just wanted everything to be perfect. I didn't mean for it to get so complicated. Complicated? I pulled out another document. This is a text message you sent yesterday to your friend Ashley. Trevor is being so sweet about my mom not being able to come to the wedding. If only he knew that the last thing I want is for her to show up and ruin my perfect narrative. The gasps from the audience were audible now. I could see several people starting to gather their things. Trevor stepped forward, his voice breaking. Roselyn, is all of this true? She looked around at the faces staring at her. 200 people who had believed in her, supported her, and came to celebrate what they thought was her happiness. Every single one of them now knew they had been systematically deceived and manipulated. Trevor, I can explain. Can you? Because I don't think there's any explanation for what I've just heard that would make me want to spend the rest of my life with someone capable of this. Trevor began removing his boutonniere, his hands shaking. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone. And that's when my daughter finally realized that her perfect manipulation project had just collapsed in front of everyone who mattered to her.
What happened next was unlike anything I had ever witnessed or imagined. The silence that followed Trevor's symbolic rejection of his bride stretched for what felt like an eternity until it was broken by the most unexpected sound: applause. It started slowly, with my sister Janet standing up and clapping. Then my brother Thomas joined in, followed by several of the family friends who had contributed to Roselyn's fake charity fund. Within moments, over half of the 200 wedding guests were on their feet, applauding not the bride and groom, but me. The message was unmistakable. They were showing support for truth over deception, for the mother who had been wronged rather than the daughter who had wronged her. Roselyn stood at the altar in her beautiful wedding dress, tears streaming down her face, as the people she had manipulated for months showed her exactly what they thought of her behavior. Several guests were already walking toward the exit, shaking their heads in disgust. But not everyone was leaving. Amanda Ashford walked up to the altar and addressed the remaining crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say something on behalf of the Ashford family. We had no idea about any of these deceptions, and we are as shocked and appalled as you are. However, we want you to know that Catherine Hartwell has shown us what grace and dignity look like in the face of unimaginable betrayal. She turned to look at me. Catherine, you planned a beautiful celebration, and just because your daughter doesn't deserve it doesn't mean it should go to waste. We would be honored if you would allow us to host a different kind of party today, a celebration of truth, integrity, and the kind of strength it takes to stand up for what's right. I was stunned. Amanda, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking, we're insisting. The catering is paid for, the venue is reserved, the music is ready. Let's turn this into something positive. Robert Ashford stepped forward and addressed the crowd. Anyone who would like to stay and celebrate Catherine's courage is welcome to join us for what we're now calling a Truth and Justice reception. The bar will be open, and we have enough food for everyone. The response was overwhelming. Nearly 150 guests chose to stay, forming an impromptu receiving line to congratulate me on my bravery and to apologize for believing the lies they'd been told. One by one, people approached me with their own stories of how Roselyn's deception had affected them. My cousin Rebecca was in tears.
Catherine, I felt so guilty about not doing more to help you when I thought you were sick. I actually sent Roselyn an extra $500 last week because I was worried about your medical bills." Marcus, Roselyn's godfather, was visibly angry. "That letter she sent me broke my heart. I've been telling everyone at work about my niece's courage in planning a wedding for her struggling mother. I feel like such a fool." But the most meaningful conversation came from an unexpected source. Emma, Roselyn's college roommate and maid of honor, approached me with her bridesmaid bouquet in hand. "Mrs. Hartwell, I need to tell you something. I've been feeling uneasy about Roselyn's behavior for months, but I couldn't put my finger on what was bothering me. Now I understand. She's been testing her manipulation skills on smaller things for years, convincing professors to extend deadlines with false family emergencies, getting out of paying for group dinners by claiming financial hardship, making friends feel guilty for not accommodating her constantly changing plans." Emma handed me my bouquet. "I always thought she was just really good at getting what she wanted. I never realized she was actually just really good at lying. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner and warn you somehow." Throughout this impromptu reception, Roselyn sat alone at a small table near the edge of the celebration area. Trevor had left immediately after removing his boutonniere, accompanied by his parents and several other family members. She had changed out of her wedding dress into a simple black dress she'd apparently brought as a backup outfit. And she sat there, watching the party that should have been her wedding reception transform into a celebration of her mother's vindication. Around 4 p.m., she finally approached me. "Mom, can we talk privately?" I followed her to a quiet area near the lake, away from the ongoing celebration. For the first time in weeks, we were alone together. "I suppose you're proud of yourself," she said, her voice hollow. "No, Roselyn, I'm not proud. I'm heartbroken. I'm heartbroken that my daughter was capable of such calculated cruelty. I'm heartbroken that you turned my love for you into a weapon against me. And I'm heartbroken that it took public humiliation for you to face the consequences of your actions." She was quiet for a long time, staring out at the lake where her wedding photos should have been taken. Finally, she said, "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Yes, you did, Roselyn. You documented everything. You called it a project. You bragged about it to your friends. You meant it for every bit of it." "I was just trying to have the perfect wedding without going into debt or asking you to sacrifice your retirement savings." I stared at her. "Roselyn, I spent my retirement savings anyway. The only difference is that instead of asking me honestly and letting me choose to help you, you stole the money, excluded me from the celebration, and made me out to be either sick, struggling, or selfishly stepping aside."
I thought if I handled everything quietly, everyone would get what they wanted without anyone having to feel bad about it. What I wanted was to be your mother. What I wanted was to help you celebrate the most important day of your life. What I wanted was to be treated like someone who mattered to you. For the first time since this ordeal began, Roselyn seemed to truly understand what she had done. "I've lost everything, haven't I? Trevor won't speak to me, half my friends have blocked me on social media, and the other half think I'm a sociopath. My job will probably let me go when word gets around about the charity fraud." "You haven't lost everything," I said quietly. "You still have the opportunity to learn from this and become a different person. Do you think you'll ever be able to forgive me?" I looked at my daughter, this person I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, who had repaid that love with systematic betrayal and manipulation. "I don't know, Roselyn. Right now, I'm not even sure who you really are. The daughter I thought I raised would never have been capable of what you did. So I don't know if I'm forgiving the person who hurt me or if I'm mourning the person I thought you were." As the sun began to set over Crystal Lake, the impromptu celebration was winding down. Guests approached me throughout the evening to exchange contact information, to thank me for my courage, and to express their admiration for how I'd handled an impossible situation. Linda Castellano found me near the end of the evening. "Catherine, I've been doing this job for 15 years, and I've never seen someone handle a situation like this with such dignity and strategic brilliance. You turned what could have been a private family disaster into a teachable moment about the importance of truth and integrity." As I drove home that evening, I reflected on how dramatically my life had changed in just 1 week. 7 days ago, I was a mother who thought she was secretly funding her daughter's dream wedding. Tonight, I was a woman who had publicly confronted systematic deception and won the respect and support of an entire community. My phone buzzed with text messages throughout the evening, friends thanking me, family members apologizing for doubting me, and even strangers who had heard about the events and wanted to express their support. But the most meaningful message came from Trevor around 10 p.m. "Mrs. Hartwell, thank you for saving me from making the biggest mistake of my life. You showed me who Roselyn really was before I legally bound myself to her. I will always be grateful for your courage." 6 months later, I received an invitation that brought tears to my eyes. Not to a wedding, but to a small dinner party hosted by Amanda and Robert Ashford. The invitation read, "Celebrating Catherine Hartwell's birthday and the friendships that grew from choosing truth over comfort." I had lost a daughter that day, but I had gained a community of people who valued integrity, courage, and the kind of love that doesn't require lies to sustain it. Sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone you love is refuse to enable their worst behavior, even when the consequences are painful for everyone involved. And sometimes standing up for yourself isn't just about personal vindication, it's about teaching everyone around you that manipulation, deception, and cruelty have real consequences, and that truth and dignity will always triumph in the end. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.